everyone, and welcome to No Offseason, presented by Sam's Club. I'm Chantel Jennings.
And I'm Sabreena Merchant.
Today on the show, let the games begin. The first four are in the can, and the first round of March Madness starts today. We're breaking down the key games, possible upsets, and more to watch for. But first, as many of you probably already know, we have a deal. Zena closed out Deal or No Deal on the podcast earlier this week, but obviously it's something we're going to be talking about for a while. The WNBA and Players Union reached a new CBA agreement early Wednesday morning. We've been reporting on it and breaking down the details. Sabreena, you talked about those details yesterday with Zena and Leja, but can you break it down again for any listeners who haven't heard yet? And what else have we learned since then?
Right. So I think big picture, salary revenue share is the main thing we've been talking about. So we'll go over that again. The players got 20% of the total team and league revenue. So that's 20% of gross revenue for what we're talking about. If you recall, we talked about how they had proposed high 20s. The league was countering in 15. So sort of met in the middle at that 20% number. And that'll be the average over the life of the deal, which we should say is 7 years long, though there is an opt-out after 6 seasons. So that 20% revenue share means that in 2026, we're getting a salary cap of $7 million. And to put that in context, the salary cap last season was $1.5 million. Now the salary cap is $7 million and the supermax is $1.4 million, which is basically the equivalent of a full cap in 2025. That also means that minimum salaries are around $300,000 compared to maximum salaries of $250,000 in 2025. And you're going to get an average salary close to $600,000. So big monetary gains for the WNBA players in year one. And we should say, like, the league is projecting these numbers to go up sizably over the course of the deal to where, like, that supermax number of 1.4 is going to rise to about $2 million by the end of the deal, corresponding raises for everything else too.
Yeah, I mean, I think this to me feels like a true negotiation where it's like in a negotiation, both sides feel like they won, both sides feel like they lost. Like that's a true compromise. And this one to me, like, genuinely feels that way. I don't think you walk out of this saying like, oh man, the league really got the better end of this deal, or like the players really got the better end of this deal. Like, I think both sides really have some major wins here. But I'm curious for you first, like what do you think is the biggest win on either side of this deal?
Well, I think the biggest win is that they're going to have a season that starts on time, and that's a win for both sides,
all of
right?
Us, yep.
Considering the momentum that WNBA has had over the last few years, all of the conversation around the league, all of the contentiousness that sort of defined these negotiations, for them to have productive bargaining, right, that resulted in a deal that I think both parties are going to be happy with, that results in the season starting on time, that resulted in, a very nice picture of them celebrating with, their champagne and weird glasses at the Langham Hotel on Wednesday morning, like, just to put a bow on this process and, get to moving on the 30th WNBA season, which should be celebratory in its own way, I think is the biggest win. As far as like revenue sharing, that being a part of the agreement is just a big win for the players, right? Because never before has the salary cap been directly tied to how much revenue the league brings in. So I think that concept is a big win for the players. The number, I would say, is probably a closer win for the league, just because, the players started this negotiation at 40%, which is closer to what NBA players get. So to come down to 20 is substantial movement. And, I think they're happy to get a share of the revenue, but also like, next time there's a bigger number to fight for there. I don't know, Chantel, any other wins and losses immediately come out to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously we're going to keep, checking in with people and trying to figure out as much as we can about this deal. And obviously they spent 100 hours or something at the bargaining table together. There was a lot of push and pull. I know that when it happened Wednesday, it was like we're, checking in with sources and we're like, it's going to happen. It's not going to happen. It's going to happen. It's not going to happen. And trying to figure that out. And it was like, there were clearly starts and stops to this process for a year and a half, but especially in that last week. And I feel like when we started getting all the details, to me, the biggest thing that I thought like, oh, that's a win for the league was 7 years. Like that's a good contract. When you think about the growth that has happened in the league over the last 2 years, like before 2024, the top 6 years for attendance in the WNBA were the first 6 years of the WNBA. And now you have 2 seasons in the top 4 or the top 5, 2024 and 2025. Last season set a record for attendance. And so between that and the money coming in, like, it's clearly it's clear to everyone that the WNBA is sort of on this rocket ship trajectory right now. And so when you think of that, like, revenue sharing is obviously a win for both of them because one success is the other's success. And when you can share in that success, like, a rising tide lifts all boats. But I was thinking about the term of it being 7 years with an opt out after 6. And I think that obviously, to me, feels like a win for the league because then they're able to go out in terms of investment, in terms of new investors, new teams, whatever it might be, and open their books and say, like, this is these are the numbers to expect. Like, revenue share
Mhm.
will be a part of it, and this is what we're projecting. But, like, these are the salaries. This is the expenses we're, expecting. And I think that 7 years of being able to open their books for potential investors, potential new teams, whatever it might be, sponsorships, partnerships, like, that feels like a huge win. Um, for the league. And then I think the family planning benefits, like, obviously I'm a little biased here. I'm coming off of 6 months of my own maternity leave with 2 little ones at home, 3 in total, but, like, to hear those new benefits and the fact that, the jump from 2020 to now, getting it into the CBA in 2020 and the expansion of it now feels like a massive win for a league of women.
Yeah, and just to clarify there, in 2020, the WNBA offered family planning benefits like fertility treatments and things like that for players who had 8 years of service. And now that criteria has dropped down to players with 2 years of service. So it's much more accessible for the average WNBA player to start thinking about, if they want to have a family, if they want to freeze their eggs, things like that. And again, like you said, a League of Women makes a lot of sense to be thinking about that. And considering most WNBA players do not hit 8 years of service, this is just a perk that will be again, accessible to more of the WNBA players than previously was in the old CBA. So I think that's a big win. The last thing I want to talk about is the core designation, another win for the players. This is something that has allowed teams to control the negotiating rights for players, even if they are unrestricted free agents. We've learned that starting in 2027, players who have more than 6 years of service will no longer be eligible to be cored. So you think about like how heading into this offseason, like Asia Wilson, Jackie Young, Chelsea Gray, they all have the potential to be cored by the Las Vegas Aces. That will no longer be the case in 2027 because they've all played more than 6 years in the WNBA. So I think that's a big win for the players just to ensure more agency in their free agency processes. Rookie scale contracts also going up big time in this CBA. Previously rookie scale has been closer to the minimum contract in the WNBA. Now it's going to be a lot closer to the average salary. We've heard that it's going to be about the number one pick's going to get about like 9% of the salary cap. And that's a big jump from about 5.6% of the salary cap in previous iterations. And that also means that the people who are still on their rookie contracts, like the ones in the massive 2024 and 2025 drafts, they will have their contracts scaled up. So they're closer to what the 2026 draftees are getting. So it's not like, oh, hey, sucks to suck, you got drafted in the wrong time for the WNBA. Like their contracts will all be right-sized. And that makes a lot of sense because we talked about how much these rookie classes have changed, the overall popularity and financial picture of the WNBA. So, making them part of the financial gains makes a lot of sense.
And for anyone who doesn't do mental math immediately, I've already done this on my calculator, so I don't think I'm doing this mental math now. But that means that the number one pick in this 2026 WNBA draft is going to get roughly $630,000, which is 10 times more than,
It's a big chunk of change, yeah. You could
Caitlin
see why
Clark
AZ Fudd was
9 times
thanking
more.
Stewie on their, co-podcast last week.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's just really interesting to think back to 2020 and that CBA and what the things that were celebrated as wins during that CBA. And obviously this is a process and each negotiation, each bargaining session builds to the next. But it's like, you think back to that and the wins were like that players could sit and book an economy plus on flights. Now, obviously, they have charter flights, and that changed during the course of the last CBA. It was, another win was that players were going to have their own rooms on road trips. And I think that speaks to the growth of this league, that sort of the wins of yesteryear are like kind of wild to think about now. And now projecting forward as well that, when will this CBA suddenly feel out of date? When will Nafisa Collier getting 1.5 million be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe she's only making 1.5 million when, next year instantly player 180 will make more money than Asia Wilson did last year. Like, it's just truly transformational. It's pretty wild to think about how much has changed from last week to now. Sort of these numbers that now are real things. Obviously, they need to ratify it, sign this deal. And then we get to move on to our 6-week off season. So I think, again, we should change our podcast from no off season to 6-week off season. Sabreena, maybe you can give our listeners a sense of everything that needs to happen between now and 6 weeks from now.
Yeah, I feel like 6 weeks is even too generous because we're recording this on March 19th. Training camp starts on April 19th, and basically everything has to get done before then. I think technically you could still sign free agents like during training camp, but you kind of want them to be a part of your training camp. Like, that's the whole point of having it. So first things first, the players have to vote on ratifying the CBA. Then the Board of Governors, which is the ownership, votes on ratifying the CBA. We get all the details together, sign the formal paperwork. You get this big fancy document that will govern the terms of the WNBA for the next 7 years. Then we get to have the expansion draft, right? As you mentioned, Chantel, we're going to have 180 players. That's because 2 more teams are being added, Toronto and Portland. And there's going to be an expansion draft that allows those 2 teams to select players from the existing 13 teams. Unfortunately, we don't have all of the rules yet that we can kind of guess based on the provisions that have existed in previous CBAs and what we know about this current CBA. But yeah, that has to happen first. Then we get to have what we're calling the college draft, though I guess a lot of internationals are part of that. So the other draft, for everybody in the WNBA. Then you get to have free agency, which includes, extending offer sheets to your restricted free agents, extending core designations to your unrestricted free agents, meeting with all the potential players you want to have on your team, and then actually signing them to contracts, which requires understanding the new cap environment, figuring out how much money everybody's worth in this new system. And yeah, that's all going to happen in about 6 days, which is going to be after the Final Four, while the college draft is happening, while these teams are still scouting, for the draft during March Madness. So we can all, have preseason games and tip off the season on May 8th, like everything was supposed to when this started.
It's just, I mean, I'm like preemptively tired. I mean, I think everyone who reports on women's basketball is already tired right now. And the NCAA tournament hasn't even started yet. But it's just like, oh my gosh, the next month is going to be just a whirlwind, an absolute whirlwind. Yeah, and I think of sort of the life of a GM over the next month. Usually GMs travel to the Final Four for meetings, and those aren't happening this year. There's going to be an all-star game that happens at the Final Four. You were there last year. A lot of the GMs were in attendance, and it was a chance for some of these players who aren't playing in the Final Four to have one last chance to get in front of these GMs in live play. GMs aren't going to be, most GMs, to my knowledge, aren't going to be sitting there watching that game because no one has 3 hours, 2 hours, or an hour. I guess maybe the Mercury staff will be there, but people are not going to have a chance to, take any amount of time out of their day to do anything that is not absolutely necessary and absolutely critical to the success of their team immediately. So I guess a big shout out to the family and friends of GMs and coaches in the WNBA. You probably won't see much of them for the next month.
I hope you guys all got your trips in during this extended negotiating period when they couldn't do anything else.
It's going to be a wild ride. We're going to be there for all of it, but we should probably turn our attention to the NCAA tournament. The first round starts tonight. So up next, what to expect from the first weekend of the tourney.
It's finally March, and you know what that means. Bracket season, baby. Picture it. You're hosting the big tourney game. You've got your jersey, you're looking good, and now all you need is, everything else to host. No sweat, though, because you're a Sam's Club member. In one trip, you say yes to grabbing everything you need and to getting it all for unbelievably low prices. Plates, cups, tables, chairs, pizza, wings, snacks, sweets, and the ultimate three-pointer, a big screen TV. Heck, you could even get it delivered. That's because the play that Sam's Club runs is called Yes and. It means getting just what you need and enjoying the perks that come with membership, like express delivery. Bonus points! So even if you don't win your bracket, you'll win Best Host. Join Sam's Club, the club of Yes and. On eligible items, terms and fees apply. See samsclub.com/yesand for details.
All right, Sabreena, The moment is finally here. Round 1 of the NCAA tournament kicks off Friday. The top 16 teams in the tournament are hosting these games at home. First round games are not always the most exciting, but are there any that you have, circled in your calendar?
Yeah, it's not the greatest year for the mid-majors. I think we talked about this
Yeah.
on the live stream. Only one mid-major escaped like the AQ pool of 11 seeds and below, and that's Princeton, which is like
Mhm.
a solid 8-9 every year. But yeah, beyond that, just a tough year for the non-power conferences, which I hope is not indicative of things to come. But in that vein, the first round matchup that I have outlined is one that does not involve any mid-majors, and that's Baylor versus Nebraska. Nebraska looked fantastic beating Richmond the other night. They've obviously had a very tough schedule in the Big Ten. Did not collect a lot of wins in that tough schedule, which is why they were on the bubble heading into Selection Sunday. But, Britt Prince, Maya Hargrove, like this is a team that has a lot of talent, a lot of shooting ability. Uh, I think they were sort of peaking, if you can say that, towards the end of the season when they finally got their first quad one win against Washington, but then obviously they lost to Indiana in the Big Ten tournament. So hard to say. These teams are also hit and miss, but a team that can actually score could give Baylor some trouble because Baylor likes to grind things down, really slow the pace, make you play in the half court. And I think Nebraska, if they can just get a little more tempo, this could be an interesting 6-11 game.
Yeah, I think Britt Prince for Nebraska, sophomore guard, beyond the fact that, just look for her out on the court. She wears a headband, no ponytail, just
It's a lot of
rocking
hair
her
just
hair down.
flying. Yeah.
Yep. But I had brought this up to you the other day because the number of players that are having 50, 40, 90 seasons this year is kind of remarkable. Like there's something in the water or the Gatorade or the Powerade this year. I don't know what it is, but she's one of those. And you look at just sort of Maggie Dugan was having one of those seasons for Richmond, Britt Prince having one of those seasons. Sarah Strong is, almost at a 60, 40, 90 season. Like it's really impressive. I remember Paige had this season last year and it was like, wow, look. And now it's something like 4 or 5 players in the NCAA are having 50, 40, 90 seasons. So I agree. I think she's going to be a tough matchup in that game simply because she's such an efficient and great scorer.
Yeah, totally. Any other matchups that you have your eye on in the first round, or you want to look ahead to the second round, Chantel?
Yeah, I think generally the first round games for the women's tournament, I'm more looking at like how do teams look when they come out because if we're going to have bigger upsets and I'm not talking about 8-9 games, I feel like those are kind of toss-ups. Like I did pick Princeton over Oklahoma State, but I'm not going to consider that an upset even though the seed line would say so. But I'm really curious to see how South Carolina responds in a 16-1 game. Like it's going to be really, really lopsided. But I think what can you see beyond the score? How, motivated do they look? How are they engaged on the bench, even when they're up by 40, 50? I'm really excited to see South Carolina. I'm really, for the same reason, excited to see Vanderbilt. They had an early exit, a loss to Ole Miss during the SEC tournament. So curious to see them. UConn, sort of having this undefeated season and the target on their back. Curious to see them. I'm curious to see Michigan. They were the team I went out on a limb for in my Final Four. So, they've got Holy Cross. So 215, that would be quite the upset, but still excited to see them, how they look. And Iowa, obviously that 51-point loss to UCLA in the Big Ten championship game. Like, how did they look? How did they respond? Does Ava Hayden come out and have an absolute monster game to sort of redeem herself and her Hawkeyes on this NCAA tournament stage?
Yeah, and I think there's a few players that, would love to see on a bigger stage. You think about 2 years ago how Audie Crooks had that massive game against Maryland and then, follows it up with helping Iowa State almost upset Stanford at Maples Pavilion, right? They end up going into overtime and losing that game. But, a player maybe who's a little bit under the radar who we get a chance to see on a bigger stage. Maybe that's Brooklyn Meyer, who, leading South Dakota State back to the tournament for the 4th time in 4 seasons.
Right.
They've got an interesting matchup there against Washington. You think about, I know you've mentioned her before, like Kennedy Blair on Michigan State. I don't really think she's a national name, but like Michigan State does well in their first game and then, plays Oklahoma well. Like she's a player who could have, a nice coming out moment on this stage. So I always like to see who's going to announce themselves. And I think the fun part of it is we just like don't know if who's going to make that happen because like that's why it's called Madness. I'm also kind of just
Mhm.
interested to see how Villanova looks. You know, we've talked about how the
Yep.
Big East is really just UConn and everybody else. And Villanova was the only other team in that conference to make it to the tournament. And, you know, they played UConn pretty well at their one game at home. The other games, not so much, but like now they have a chance to actually play good teams that are not UConn, which has to be fun, right? Like just give it an
Mhm.
opportunity. They're one of the only teams to like beat West Virginia at home this season, which I think is really impressive. So uh, I'm interested to see how they look against Texas Tech and maybe even potentially against LSU if they get to that matchup because, you know, we make a lot of jokes about the Big East, but I think the Wildcats have had a pretty decent season and probably deserve a little bit more respect than I've put on them.
Yeah, there was a quote from Seton Hall coach Tony Bozzella that caught my eye because, you know, Gino Auriemma was saying the same thing after they beat Villanova in the Big East championship game. He was saying, you know, they're going to give whoever they face in the first round, like, this is a tough team. Like, there's a reason
Mhm,
why, you know, and why they're going to give other teams problems is because the Big East is better than we get credit for as a conference.
mhm,
And you know, I had talked to Gino Auriemma earlier this month and asked him, you know, how does the Big East actually prepare you guys? And he said, you know, there's so many different systems, personnel in this conference that we do feel like we see a lot of what we could see down the road through this conference. And to go back to that Tony Bozzella quote, is he was asked after, I think it must have been after their last game, but um, you know, it's the third straight year that the Big East isn't getting that many teams into the tournament. And he was asked, like, what does the Big East need to do to get more teams into the tournament? And he said, well, teams 6 through 11 or 7 through 11 just need to suck. So, like, we can just beat them. And then you can have 5 or 6 teams with these awesome records coming out of the Big East,
mm,
rather than everyone being really good and sort of beating up on each other and having a lot of sort of these middling records so that it makes it look like the Big East isn't as good as it is. And so, in the same way that I think we look at like Princeton and we say, you know, they're really carrying the flag for the Ivy League this year. Um, Villanova feels like it's sort of carrying the flag for the rest of the Big East outside of
mhm.
UConn in terms of like, you know,
The more
if they
relatable part
beat
of the Big East, you
LSU.
know?
Yeah, like if they beat LSU though, like can you
Yeah.
imagine sort of the other coaches in the Big East being like, look, see, like come on, and
Mhm.
and I'm sure Gino would say something. He'd have the opportunity to say something in the NCAA tournament, but yeah, that Texas Tech matchup round 1, potential LSU matchup round 2, should be an interesting road for them.
All right. Well, I think I've already picked Nebraska over Baylor as my most likely upset in this round. Do you have any first round upsets that you're going to call out?
I mean, I am believing Brooklyn Meyer when she says that the world needs to take notice and that South Dakota State is coming. So
They're
I picked
coming.
South Dakota State over Washington. Um, yeah, I mean, I think she obviously so much of what they do just revolves around her production. Like she needs to have a huge game. South Dakota State will go as Brooklyn Myers goes, and so we'll see about that. I did pick Fairfield over Notre Dame. I talked about this on the live stream the other night. You and I talked about it as I was filling out my bracket, and it was I picked Notre Dame, then I picked Fairfield, then I picked Notre Dame, then I picked Fairfield, and I went back and forth on this for a while and kind of felt like I just needed to put myself out there.
Mm.
I'm banking on the fact with this one that they hit like 14 threes. They average 11 a game. They're going to need to hit at least that to beat Notre Dame. Um, but yeah, so I think those are probably my 2 biggest upsets that I have in the first round. I'm looking at my bracket right now. Um, yeah, those are my 2
Yeah, I'm
biggest
with you. I
upsets
don't
in the
have
first round.
anything worse than an 11 beating a 6. So not exactly
Yeah,
chalk,
those
but
12
still a lot of
fives just
favorites.
yeah, the 12 fives just aren't as exciting.
Yeah.
But let's move on to the second round. I feel like that's kind of where we get the better matchups, obviously, or that's when we start to get the better matchups in the women's tournament. Are there any games or teams that you're specifically excited to see in those games?
Yeah, I mean, you're spot on about the second round. I think the 2 best games of last year's tournament both came in the second round, whether that was
Mhm.
Maryland versus Alabama or Kentucky
Gosh.
versus Kansas State, you know, just
Mhm.
incredible shot making at the end of that one. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm really interested to see Maryland versus North Carolina, you know, a good old ACC battle out in Chapel Hill. I think
Yep.
Michigan State, Oklahoma could be a lot of fun. And whoever gets to play Michigan, I'm interested in. Like, I'm really not sure if that's going to be NC State or Tennessee. Obviously, Tennessee has not won a lot of games of late, but if they manage to beat NC State, I think, it only takes one to just sort of get the ball rolling again. And that's a team that, because of their high pressure, because of their, high volume of threes, they just are fit for upsets at this time of the year. So those are a few that I have my eye on.
Yeah, I think the one benefit Michigan would have against Tennessee is they have so many capable ball handlers that, I think against a press like that, you can put the ball in Silas' hands, Mila's hands, Olivia's hands. Like, you've got a bunch of players on that team that you can trust to not sort of make the stupid turnover.
It's pretty close against Ohio State. So, I'm not necessarily saying that they're rock solid against a press.
That's true. That's true. That's very, very true. I think Minnesota Ole Miss is going to be interesting. I always like, we obviously didn't get the Notre Dame TCU matchup that we all wanted. But I do like, or I find it really interesting when a transfer is playing against a former conference foe. And so Cody McMahon, former Ohio State star, playing against Minnesota. She had a ton of success against Minnesota while playing with Ohio State, mostly because Ohio State was, I think, always the more talented team in those matchups. But she averaged something like 19.6 assists a game during her first 3 years at Ohio State against the Gophers. But I think also, the flip side of that is that Dawn Plitz-White kind of has a sense of what Cody can do. I don't feel like Minnesota, though, has sort of that one-on-one guarding ability with her. I'm curious to see how they're going to try to slow her down. And obviously, Ole Miss has a challenging system. We saw that with Vanderbilt, specifically, that like even really, really talented teams can have problems with just what they do and the pressure they put on you. And so I think Minnesota, Ole Miss, I do have the Rebels winning that game, but I think that will be a pretty interesting game too. And South Carolina, USC, we get a rematch of the real SC. Again,
or South
I don't
Carolina,
see
Clemson.
True. I have USC winning, beating Clemson in the first round, specifically to line up the real USC round 2, or the real.
Well, don't worry,
SC.
it's going to happen again during the 2026-27 regular season with
next season.
Juju Watkins and Sanaya Hall and all of those people on the other USC side.
Yeah, it'll be a little different. And I do think South Carolina won that game by, I think, 17 points early in the season. But sort of, the storylines that I always look for in these games, even if the score might be lopsided or it's a win or a loss or whatever. I'm curious to see how Jazzy Davidson does against South Carolina sort of the second time. That was everything for her this season has sort of been a tall ask. Like, that was her third game of the year.
Yep.
And to go into a South Carolina game and say, like, all right, you are our focal point. Have at it. Here's South Carolina. So I'm really curious, sort of a season older with her sea legs, like more sort of established in this. And obviously she was hurt during the Big Ten tournament, but we've gotten news that she'll be back. And so I think, I'm just curious to see. I was pulling up her stats from that game. She scored 8 points.
Yeah, Tessa
3
Johnson
rebounds,
kind of rooked her in that
3
game.
assists.
Drew some fouls on her to start, made it a little challenging. She'd never really played through foul trouble before. So,
it was only her third game of her college.
It's a veteran
career,
up against freshmen, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yes,
and she's less
Tessa
of a
Johnson.
freshman now that she's gone through a full season.
Yeah. Noted Minnesotan. Just wanted to call that out. And I think I'll just call this game out too. UConn, Iowa State, you were talking about sort of the run that the Cyclones went on when they went out to Maples Pavilion 2 years ago and, beating Maryland, almost beating Stanford. I don't think they beat UConn or almost beat UConn in stores. Like, that just doesn't happen. But
Speaking
I am
of
curious
tall
to sort of...
asks, Chantel.
Yes, exactly. But yeah, I'm excited to see Audie in that game. Again, we've talked a lot about sort of having Addie back, having this team at a more healthy level. I'm really curious to see how that game goes.
Yeah, I think one other game just to keep an eye on is TCU versus whoever comes out of Washington, South Dakota State. Obviously, we talked a lot about South Dakota State, but we've seen just sort of how TCU can be a little bit more fickle than you might expect a top seed to be because they're so reliant on Olivia Miles' production. And when she's been in foul trouble, we've seen some real concerns for this TCU team. Obviously, they get to be at home in Fort Worth. I don't expect them to have a ton of difficulty in the 3-14 matchup, but Washington has played a really tough schedule. Like, that's a good Big Ten team. South Dakota State, a very veteran team. They know how to play together, which TCU, they're veterans, but they don't play together, right? They come together for 1 year and then they disperse, right? So I think that experience, Washington is another team that has been together for some time. Like Avery Howell, really their only major addition this season, along with their freshmen. But yeah, that could be a fun matchup in the second round out in Sacramento 4.
I feel like one note about that TCU UC San Diego game, though, that we have to mention is that UC San Diego is obviously coached by Heidi Vandeveer, sister of former Stanford coach Tara Vandeveer. Mark Campbell, TCU coach, formerly of Oregon women's basketball. And so this is a matchup that not, he wasn't obviously the head coach, Kelly Graves is, but, there's some familiarity there, and you do wonder sort of how much Tara is helping out Heidi with the game planning and matchups and, trying to get UC San Diego ready for that one. The game I actually thought you were going to call out in terms of being a sneaky good second-round game was Kentucky, West Virginia. In West Virginia, Kentucky, you're obviously a big fan of that team. I know you've watched a lot of the Wildcats this year.
A lot of the Wildcats, that's correct, yeah.
Yes, I think you've over-indexed on Kentucky a little bit, but press Virginia in West Virginia, I think that's going to be a really, really interesting game. And I just think about the teams that increase their stock and their path to the Sweet 16 over the last month, and no team did more for themselves than West Virginia. Winning the Big 12 tournament in the way that they did, put themselves in hosting, got themselves a really quite favorable path, I would say, to the Sweet 16, to Fort Worth. And that's impressive because I don't know if I would have put them as a Sweet 16 team, even 2 weeks ago at the start of the Big 12 tournament.
Yeah, something I've discovered watching Kentucky this season is I'm not sure Kenny Brooks ever installed a press break. He just had Georgia Amore for 5 years. And it doesn't work as well when you don't have Georgia Amore. So I am very interested to see how that pans out because, obviously you can look ahead and know that this is coming. But they were a little flustered by Maryland, who doesn't even have a full traditional press. They just come at you in waves. So that has to be better if you're going to play West Virginia in Morgantown.
Well, there are Minnesotans coming in for Kenny Brooks. I will say that last weekend, since there were no games live for me to attend in Minneapolis, I went to the high school state championship here because what else is a women's basketball writer going to do?
True Minnesotan,
if not go
Chantel.
to the I know. Went to the barn, saw Madden Greenway, 2026 signee for Kentucky guard. She dropped 30 points on a team out of Duluth. Was really impressed with her. It was interesting to watch high school girls basketball. I will say, a lot of missed shots. But overall, quite impressed with Madden Greenway. I'm excited to see her. And I can.
They could probably use her to help break the press for West Virginia, but
well, that's what I was thinking.
Around.
Yeah. Next year. All right, Sabreena, I have another round of something in common. And I've been talking this up for a while because I have been coming up with these. I have 3 rounds for you. And I'll just straight off the bat tell you none of them have to do with stats. So
okay.
I'm going to go from what I think is the easiest to the hardest. So the first one, Leonardo da Vinci.
Oh, my God. This is a basketball podcast, Chantel.
Yep. Kim Mulkey.
Okay.
And Dance Moms Everywhere.
Oh, my God. Leonardo da Vinci, Kim Mulkey, and Dance Moms Everywhere. I feel like I should be getting 4 together. That's usually how this works. But let's see. Kim Mulkey and
3,
Dance Moms makes it really seem like sparkles. So yeah, are they? They're big on I don't really think of sparkles associated with Da Vinci, but maybe I'm yeah, just really,
You're on the right
really
path.
into sparkles presentation,
So the answer is sequins. I did some research, and Leonardo da Vinci actually
got it.
created he created an invention that made sequins, I guess.
I love that.
Big fan of sequins. So that's something that all 3 of those people or groups of people have in common. Well,
Great.
I don't know how we're going to do because I thought that one was the easiest. So know.
Sorry that I
Here we
didn't
go.
know Leonardo da Vinci invented sequins.
All good. Well, he didn't invent them. He just invented a machine that made them. Okay, second one. And this one, I have a fourth one if you want it, but I'm going to start with 3.
Okay, got it. We'll start with 3. Yeah.
All right. Marina Mabry,
Okay.
Winnie the Pooh,
Oh my God.
and George Lucas.
Okay. Marina Mabry, Winnie the Pooh, and George Lucas.
I'm feeling so proud of myself right now.
Goodness gracious. Okay.
This is where I really thrive in games.
Really thrive in games. Let's see. Are they all from New Jersey?
No, they're not.
I don't actually know where Winnie the Pooh is from. So, yeah, no idea.
He's from the 100
let's
Acre
see.
Woods, obviously.
Yeah. I don't know
The
if it
fourth
has like
one
a
would
real
be-
life location associated with it.
The fourth one would be Cookie Monster.
Oh my God. Okay. Well, Marina Mabry, I feel like we associate with, unfortunately, the crash outs. Cookie Monster does get emotional for sure. I don't really associate that with Winnie the Pooh though.
Or George Lucas.
Or George Lucas, yeah. Yeah, I don't really have anything here. What is it, Chantel?
They all have famous jars. So George Lucas's famous jar is Jar Jar Binks.
Jar Binks, yeah.
Winnie the Pooh and Cookie Monster obviously have jars, and then Marina Mabry
Of
has
course,
a crash out
yeah.
jar.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
last
Mhm.
one. This one I think is the hardest. I will give you a preemptive hint. It is,
Okay.
keep in mind that our former colleague, Ben Pickman, may or may not sort of be a hint here.
Okay.
Our
Our
your
former
friendship
colleague
with
Ben
him, just
Pickman,
keep
we
it-
should say, was just announced officially today as a member of the Portland Fire. Last line
Very
of the press
exciting.
release. If you're
He
looking.
made it.
Okay.
All right, ready?
Mhm.
Kara Lawson,
Okay.
the Backstreet Boys,
All right.
and Elite Runners.
Oh my God. Kara Lawson, the Backstreet Boys, and Elite Runners. And you mentioned Ben's name for some reason.
I did.
Okay.
I did. That is true.
I mean, Ben and Elite Runners, I could see some connection there, you know.
Right?
What that has to
So
do
we could
with
say Elite Runners like Ben.
Light Ben. Kara Lawson doesn't wear glasses. The Backstreet Boys and Kara Lawson. This is fascinating. I mean, they've been in Vegas a lot of late. I feel like every time I open Instagram, like there's people who are at the Sphere watching the Backstreet Boys.
You're on the right path.
Kara Lawson, Backstreet Boys, Elite Runners. What?
I can give you a fourth one. Beer drinkers would be the fourth thing in here.
I mean, I'm thinking of like things that require like endurance, but like what is Kara Lawson enduring through? Backstreet Boys have a very long set. Kara Lawson, the Backstreet Boys, Elite Runners, and Beer Drinkers. Yeah, I think I assumed coming into this that I was going to have like a basketball related something in common, and the fact that Kara Lawson is here doesn't seem like enough.
They're all basketball related.
They're all
In a way.
basketball related. Sure.
Well,
Yeah.
it's
Yes.
a stretch, but it's a long walk, but we get there.
The jars, yeah. Basketball related. Kara Lawson, Backstreet Boys, Elite Runners, and Beer Drinkers. Kara Lawson coaches at Duke, went to Tennessee. What do I know about her?
You're getting further. If this were a game
yeah, I
of
feel like
hot and
or cold. I'm
cold,
getting colder. Yes,
you're
yeah.
getting colder.
You said I was getting closer when I talked about the Backstreet Boys having a set in Vegas at Sphere.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
I don't believe Carol Lawson's ever performed in Las Vegas.
Nope.
Yeah,
I mean,
I'm
maybe.
sorry, Chantel.
Not
I got nothing here.
They're all going to be in Germany in September.
Oh my God.
Beer drinkers, because Oktoberfest
Why are the
starts in
Backstreet Boys
September.
going to be in Germany in September?
They apparently have a worldwide tour coming up.
Oh my God.
And I brought up Ben Pickman because I thought you might
Because
remember
he ran the Berlin
that
Marathon in
last
Germany
year he
last
ran
year.
the Berlin
Yep.
Marathon. And, you know, I was on mat leave. So it was like this stretch where you were working by yourself. So I thought maybe that would jog your memory a little bit. No pun intended.
Yeah, the Backstreet Boys and Carol Lawson together, I had just nothing. You're right. This is actually the most related to basketball. I'll give you that. For the World Cup, that's why Carol Lawson's going to be there.
Yep. Mm-hmm. So for anyone who's traveling to Germany for the World Cup in September, just know the Backstreet Boys have multiple shows across the country. I checked. You can also catch the Berlin Marathon, and you can get some beer for Oktoberfest. So the German tourism board can reach out to me and maybe sponsor the C block.
Sponsor a segment of No Offseason. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. All right. Well, that's all we've got for today. We'll be back on Tuesday to break down the first and second rounds and so much more. And if you're listening to this before games start, head over to The Athletic and use our interactive bracket. The link is in the show notes. So you can try to beat me and my expert bracket. Check it out. Until then, please follow our show. And if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe. You don't want to miss our live bracket reactions. Tell your friends to check us out. And while you're at it, give us a rating, drop a comment. We love to hear from you. On behalf of The Athletic and Sabreena Merchant, I'm Chantel Jennings. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to No Offseason. Be sure to like and subscribe. We drop new episodes every Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday.